नमस्ते। हम अल्बर्टन के रूप में सम्मानपूर्वक स्वीकार करते हैं कि हम ट्रीटी 6 टेरिटरी, फर्स्ट नेशंस और मेटी पीपल की पारंपरिक भूमि पर स्थित हैं। हम फर्स्ट नेशंस, मेटी, इनुइट और कनाडा के सभी फर्स्ट पीपल्स यानी कि प्रथम लोग के इतिहास, भाषाओं और संस्कृतियों का सम्मान करते हैं, जिनकी उपस्थिति में हमारे जीवित समुदाय और समृद्ध करते हैं। हम इस नृत्य को अमिस्क्वाची स्वस्काई गान के लिए प्रार्थना के रूप में प्रस्तुत करते हैं, जो क्री, ब्लैकफुट, मेटी, नकोरसू, इरिक्वा, डने, ओजिबे, सोल्टो, अनिशनाबे, इनुइट और कई अन्य लोगों के लिए पारंपरिक सबस्थल है, जिनके इतिहास, भाषाएं और संस्कृतियाँ हमारे सम्मुख भविष्य को प्रभावित और निर्मित करते रहते हैं।
Welcome to Thrive, Training Respectful, Adaptive, Inclusive Networks in the Arts, hosted by Mass Culture. Today's workshop is asynchronous and will be presented by myself, Soni Dasmohapatra, and Fawnda Mithrush. And we are talking about ritual and thriving. So the stream that I am presenting the 7 workshops in is actually focused on the past, present, and future of the arts, culture, and heritage ecosystem in Canada. I'm really interested to understand where we are in the present in order to understand a new way of being in the future that's based on past experiences. And the future vision is to build a more equitable arts, culture, and heritage ecosystem. This particular workshop on ritual is an invitation for all of us, whether we're artists, artistic creators, directors, or in the arts sector as a whole, to take a journey in self-reflection and to welcome a pause, to recognize and document the processes of creativity we individually and collectively embed in our daily life. With the hustle culture, with stress, with many different factors that are happening in the sector, lack of funding, trying to scrounge things to make them happen, how do we really have a focused way and intention of building capacity that is individual and collective?
So, hi everyone. Soni, thank you so much for inviting me to join you on this. I think that we're just going to do a real quick intro of ourselves and then we'll get things rolling.
So, as I said, my name is Soni Dasmohapatra, and I'm a consultant who works with individual groups and public institutions, community agencies to facilitate the development of tools that focus on building inclusive platforms that incorporate strategy, design, wellness, and art for transformative change. What that means is I love talking to people and imagining different ways that we can make the art sector more equitable. And Fawnda is my colleague who loves doing this, so we talk a lot about this.
For the last couple of years, we've been sort of scheming and dreaming of ideas about how to incorporate more of all of these kinds of things that we really love into what we do. Again, as Soni said, my name is Fawnda, and I work in Edmonton's creative ecology in a number of different capacities as an event producer, administrator, and a storyteller. I am a writer first and foremost by trade. I've managed theater companies, festivals, carnivals, all sorts of kind of crazy things, and a podcast network, including the Alberta Podcast Network. Currently, I'm working with Explore Edmonton here on strategic arts. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I guess we can then get started on what we're talking about today. Soni and I cooked up this idea that we can use ritual in many different ways to support our overall thriving. And the aspects that we'll focus of that overall thriving in this session are rituals that can be created for collectives or for groups or even for more than one person at a time. Then also we're going to look at rituals for physical wellness and overall body being and things like that. And then we will have a special section at the end on rituals for creativity and creative practices. So that's the rundown of how it will go today. the idea that rituals can enhance community and connection are really, really well outlined in a book that I've recently got my hands on, and I'm kind of all over all the time, by Dimitris Xygalatas. He's written on how mostly collective ritual can really enhance the idea of connection, gathering, and community. He's done a lot of international study, and it's a fascinating book. There's a link to some interviews that he's done at the end of this presentation that you can go to.
Since time immemorial, like all humans have connected some sort of ritual to understanding nature, the space around them, the process of belonging, the process of inclusion. So I think that as we move through different phases of humanity and society, rituals have been a central healing place or grounding space for a lot of people to gather and to make sense of life, to create art, to create different methods of understanding governance of societies, of the way that we function as human beings. So I think that with the coming of massive technology, with the coming of the industrial revolution, with the coming of colonization, different worldviews were not respected necessarily, and sometimes rituals were seen as mythic or not needed, or something that was so foreign and weird. I think that now that we've sort of come full circle, people are recognizing the power of ritual, especially after COVID. I think that because we were stuck in such an isolating space, the gathering was needed, and more people are turning to ritual now in this phase of our lives to understand that things are not so consistent or explained all the time.
And I love that you brought up even how ritual is part of our governance and things like that, because this is the idea that ritual is kind of already everywhere. We'll talk a little bit about what ritual is first, because then that will help us define how it is actually everywhere. Xygalatas gives 3 R's to try and help you recognize what a ritual is and how it's different than a habit or a routine. Rituals are done repeatedly, so repetition. They're done with rigidity. It means they're always done in the same way. And this is sort of that sacredness of keeping a ritual in time and space, how maybe not how it has always been, but there is some rigidity to how something is done. And then there's redundancy. So I don't think that redundancy is the greatest word, but it's an R word. So, but it really means that the ritual itself doesn't actually have to have a function. It has to have intention and meaning, but it doesn't actually have to get anything done. It can be as simple as, you think of, like, of course, religious rituals where people cross themselves or things like that. That doesn't actually have like a real physical outcome or function in this world. However, there's intention behind it. So that actually brings meaning to what is happening. So rituals will have intention behind them over automation. Automation essentially means that you're either doing it without thinking, or that you're just doing it by rote because it is your routine or a habit, something that you're used to. The difference between, say, brushing your teeth and, like doing some kind of ritual that is special and meaningful to you is that brushing your teeth actually gets something done. You clean your teeth. You got to do that. There's meaning and symbolism to the ritual over just something rote like brushing your teeth. And rituals can be very elaborate or they can be very minimal. Even something like lighting a candle, it's very minimal. Or the signal of like the meditation bell, that kind of thing. And so again, they can also be sacred or secular as well. Just like the meditation bell, they can be an anchor or a symbol for something beginning, ending, or a milestone. You do see this in a lot of the more spiritual rituals about rites of passage and things like that. It marks the beginning of something or the end of another part of something else, right? Of course, there's like baptisms, weddings, and funerals are the common ones that everyone thinks of, but there's a lot more that can be done. There's annual rituals for marking the seasons or the passing of seasons and things like that too. So there's a lot of various things about how ritual is everywhere. And beyond the sort of maybe religious, spiritual, or even sort of superstitious rituals that are kind of the famous ones that maybe sometimes get a bad rap, there's also ritual everywhere. There's ritual in our board meetings. There's ritual at any sports game. I don't know if you watched the World Cup the other day, but yes, there's a lot of ritual around those big sports games, gatherings for festivals. If you kind of look at how a festival begins, applauding after a performance, those kinds of things. Those are symbolic and they carry meaning. So that's part of the ritual of those kinds of gatherings. Other meaningful gatherings too can be political, or they can be unite a group in emotion, like rallies or vigils, or even parades as a celebration. Parades are insanely ritualistic when you think about it. Again, we also kind of mentioned the obvious rites of passage. You could even look at something like having a birth certificate made, or even secular ones where you do take an oath at City Hall when you are, either getting married or things like that. So there's those kinds of customs that we've kind of carried along, knowing that you saying those words may not actually really do the thing, but it is imbued with that meaning and intention. And so that's why it's important, and why the ritual continues to exist.
So one of the things along this stream of past, present, future is also like in your present self embodying what that intention is. So as an artist, how do you embody your intention? What are the rituals that you put into your daily practice or your yearly practice or your creative practice that enable that intention to come forward? And I think that ritual is very important in assisting or having a toolbox to build that forward as well. So I really love that you said that, for sure.
Yeah, I think that the intention, and that's I have some more notes on that when we talk about the creative ritual, is that sometimes even just being reminded of the intention with something just small and symbolic really helps anchor and keep you from getting distracted when you're trying to focus on your creativity too. Intention may feel a little bit more clearer when you're at something like a wedding, but if you're sitting down with intention to be thankful for food, or to celebrate even just being together, those kinds of intentions are important to mark as well. And I feel when you're in situations like that, it often makes something that you may not consider to be a ritual still feel more special. Sharing a meal together, or even just, like say you have a glass of wine while you're cooking or something like that, and there's a cheers or skull or whatever language, is the one that you use for that. There's custom around that, and there's meaning. You're supposed to look the other person in the eye, you're supposed to acknowledge the presence of that other person and that you are together in that moment. And so that's kind of even where some of the private customs and rituals come into what we're talking about in terms of how ritual is kind of everywhere. So we've kind of covered what ritual is and how it's present. So we're going to take a quick little pause, and Soni's going to pull up a whiteboard here. And yeah, if you want to take these 3 minutes to pause, reflect how ritual is already present in your life and how it shows up in your family, in your community, or even just privately for you. So we'll take that 3 minutes now, and then we'll check back in with you in a moment.
शिवदूते स्वरूपेण हतदैत्यमाबले घोररूपे महारावे भैरवी नमोऽस्तु ते शिवदूते स्वरूपेण हतदैत्यमाबले घोररूपे महारावे भैरवी नमोऽस्तु ते लक्ष्मीलज्जे महाविद्ये श्रद्धे पुष्टि स्वदे ध्रुवे लक्ष्मीलज्जे महाविद्ये श्रद्धे पुष्टि स्वदे ध्रुवे महारात्रि महाविद्ये भैरवी नमोऽस्तु ते मेधे विद्यावरे भूति अब्रवी महाकाली नियते त्वं प्रसीदेशे भैरवी नमः
Okay, so we'll come back now. Soni, what did you reflect on? What are some of your rituals that are around you now in your life?
Yeah, right now it's the solstice. Like it's going to be the winter solstice, December 21st. So I really feel like winter is a time to go in and to be thoughtful, to set some intentions for the new year. So I always try to have some sort of gathering at this time and sort of reflect on what I've accomplished this past year and what I'm stepping into. And it's important to have connection because I think that as human beings, we are, like imprinted to connect with people. That is our relational piece. And so when we're talking about arts and culture and heritage, especially, like in our heritage practices, you'll notice there is a lot of ritual of, maintaining our home country practices or traditions in certain ways when you come to a diasporic identity like in Canada where we're so multicultural, right? Or even in an art and culture, like even if you're not understanding the language of what is being depicted, whether it be a dance or a theater, there's some sort of emotion that is depicted in the acting or the performance that you can feel in your heart center perhaps, right? And same thing with visual arts. Like sometimes you just look at a painting or a picture and you're so moved by it. And then I think that the artist who has created that art has gone through a massive ritual to bring that creativity for you to witness. So I think it's important to understand how we are all connected in that way.
That's a wonderful point, that there's so many layers to ritual from the individual, and it goes broader to the group. And then it gives a sense of belonging, actually, even if things are a little bit disparate and not always fully understood where it comes to language and things like that. There's still the idea that, wow, this is special and that I'm a witness, and that's interesting. In a lot of ways, gathering and connection in ritual moments, it can be very healing, it can be inspiring, and it can also galvanize communities. You do see this in rallies and things like that. When there's some kind of upheaval or something that has happened, people gather when they are feeling intensely about something. And I think that that's kind of a beautiful natural instinct that we need to share in our emotion and intensity sometimes. In very simple ways, gatherings can also just be one or two people, or two or three people. But the idea of making a gathering done by a ritual or making it more intentional is that there's usually some kind of spatial boundary. It doesn't have to be within a single room or a building, but there's somehow that the boundary is marked. And even that could even be within a Zoom call. We saw a lot of religious ceremonies happening over Zoom, and they were attended by people all over the world, right? During COVID, we found different ways to gather. And they're also often marked by either focal points, a time of year, something like that. And of course, food and drink. Food and drink is one of the most human, most beautiful, most universal, really, things of bringing people together. So there's plenty of opportunities for building rituals around even just things that maybe kind of already happen. I know during the holidays, a lot of people do have these shared meals or activities, but also maybe thinking about how to incorporate that kind of meaningful breaking bread together into collective action or activism when you have meetings, things like that. I know all board meetings go better when you have food involved. So there's those kinds of opportunities as well. Thinking about making something a little bit more meaningful or doing it with more intention than just, yes, we're supposed to have this meeting in our calendar every year. So yes, continuing to be intentional about those occasions, seasons, celebrations, and honoring others' rituals and traditions, being curious and respectful. One of my favorite new rituals or new moments that I got to experience this year was when I got to experience Diwali with Soni's family. I had never been to a Diwali celebration before. I knew a little bit about it, the festival, but wow, like that was incredibly meaningful, and I hope I get invited back.
Of course, anytime, anytime. I love that you're saying this because, the other thing that I think is very potent for me is, there are different also scriptures or ways of understanding ritual, right? So, for example, you spoke about Diwali. So, I'm Hindu. And one of the Vedic scriptures that we sort of follow is astrology, right? So, Vedic astrology, which is very different than Western astrology. But Vedic astrology also really emphasizes the notions of the sun and the moon cycles and the presence of the sun and what that means. And that is translated into many rituals that you practice when doing yoga, right? So yoga has hit the West. There's a very Western context of yoga. But when you do a sun salutation, for example, 108 times, that is very significant of a ritual and a number that denotes that ritual to worship the sun, right? And I myself, like I hold monthly moon cycles for myself, for community, for gatherings, because it is really important to be in touch with nature. And sometimes we're so disconnected from nature because of the way that our urban lives are, right? We live in our houses and it's very cold, like it is today in -30. You really don't want to go anywhere. So how do you, be in touch with nature, not that artificial light? There's the benefits of vitamin D, the benefits of being in touch with the tree energy or the spirits that are around you in nature, also rejuvenate you and provide you with embodiment and creativity that can help you move into artistic and creative practice that's different, I think, right? Than if you're just sitting in a room and not having inspiration because you're stuck, right? In that context, I think that it's really important to understand wellness as part of a ritual and understand how to incorporate wellness in your busy urban lifestyle, in your busy artistic lifestyle, in this culture that talks about pushing yourself to exhaustion. Because we need rest in order to thrive as well. So, how do we intentionally place ritual around rest? These are the questions that I have as part of our inquiry into this whole T.R.A.I.N series of past, present, future. Because I think it's important for us to take a pause as a community, as an individual, as a sector to understand where we're going towards sustainability. And this is part of it.
That's really beautiful. And I switched to the wellness slide when you were talking about yoga, because I feel that, that was a great segue into this next part of the presentation here, which you're going to talk a little bit about wellness and some of the signals in our bodies, but also just, that keeping in mind that once you make something intentional, it can help affect that it has meaning. And so that can also help you incorporate things, and even just things like noticing nature, things like, I have a poinsettia on my table now because it's like almost Christmas. So there are these signals that you can kind of like help cue your mind to either something spiritual for you or to something creative. So I will actually toss it back to you to talk a little bit more about wellness rituals.
So I think that as part of our inquiry into art and creation and understanding where we sit as humans within Canada and within our respective spaces. So right now I'm in Edmonton with Fawnda. Alberta has a very different geography and culture, let's say, than Ontario or than BC or the prairies even, or the Maritimes, right? And this is a national forum. So it's going to be different for everybody. It's not like one formula fits all, right? So when we talk about wellness, I think it's really important to identify, what does wellness mean to you? Because wellness can mean so many different things to so many different people. So wellness for me is just having that time, like I said, to rest, to be able to really know what I am doing and why am I doing it for intention, to be able to, like we talked a little bit about activism, to really push people to think outside their boxes and be uncomfortable sometimes in order to understand how we're being inequitable and how we can move up towards a pathway of equity. Because there is a lot of inequities in the arts and culture sector in Canada, and we need to recognize that and remedy this because the time is now, right? I think that there is a momentum here that we need to move into. And sometimes when we're uncomfortable, there are certain feelings in our bodies that may emerge. So, just taking that time to notice what are your triggers? What are your strengths? What is your happiness points? Your body tells you a lot. As a society, we are so intellectual. We think everything in our mind constantly, right? When we're in a meeting, when we're talking to somebody, when we're writing something, I think that our whole function is to stay in our mind and we're cut off from the rest of our body. But our body is such a powerful tool to signal to us what is wellness, to signal to us what ritual do I need to feel good. One of the things that I love doing is I love going to spas. I just love being in water because being in water gives me a different point of view. It gives me a different point of rejuvenation, gives me a point of sort of leaving everything behind and emerging into something different, right? So to me, that's a ritual. So how do I incorporate being in water a lot? And then what do you do to tap into your wellness map? You might ask what a wellness map is. So my wellness map is actually like how Fawnda was saying, in the day, you might have certain times that you move into a ritual. You might have certain triggers that move you into a ritual. You might have certain points of sort of witnessing that move you into a ritual. So what do you create around your space or in your life to have that map? And it could be daily, it could be weekly, it could be monthly, it could be yearly. But like you are the decider of how you want to play this out and how you want to incorporate this into your space, right? So another thing that I love the power of fire because fire is transformative. So whenever I have a grief moment or something that has happened to me that is so traumatic, I actually write everything down and I burn it because I know that that burning will not only provide me with clarity, but will move away the energy that I was carrying with it, right? Or sometimes like you just feel like, oh my God, my hair is so heavy, or I feel so heavy. So you go get a haircut because you're carrying those different things that maybe are not suiting you at this time to move forward, right? So I think that those are the things about wellness, like tapping into your own body, tapping into your embodied being, understanding who you are in this space and time, what external factors are impacting you, and how you can actually build a collaborative or individual space for yourself to step into your wellness, to step into community wellness, and to step into a wellness routine or practice that supports your creativity. So how do you incorporate ritual for wellness? I mean, I said a couple of things, but you can create a sacred space. So there might be a space, whether it be at your house or in your backyard, something that is just your space that you go to, maybe in the forest, maybe when you're taking a walk with your dogs, who knows? Like, but that space that is just for you. So that when you step in that space, you can just let everything go and you can tap into your wellness. Sometimes as a society, we breathe so shallow. COVID really taught us this too, right? Pause, noticing your breath. And as you're breathing slowly and bringing all of your nervous system down, what are the sensations you're feeling in your body? Where is the strength and where is the pain? Taking time every day, maybe just to tap into that. And again, noticing who is around you. How do you feel with these people in your space, right? Sometimes you're in spaces that are very nurturing, energetic, giving you a lot of energy. And sometimes you're in spaces where it's like Harry Potter, the Dementors, they suck your energy out of you. So who are the Dementors in your life?
Yeah, when you're in a threatening space, you feel that in your body, right? That's
exactly. So how do you know that? And do you know this? And what do you do to protect yourself from that energy, right? Because it happens every day in any moment, in a given time. And again, as a society, sometimes people are not comfortable being alone, or sometimes they are. But how do you feel when you're alone, right? I think that also is gauge of your wellness and how you feel. If you're able to identify these things, it's a good path to a wellness month for sure.
I want to ask you a question, actually. One of the things that I like to really do is kind of really acknowledge the seasons and the daylight, which changes in Alberta quite a lot throughout the year. So you mentioned things about the qualities of the moon and the cycle of the moon. And I wanted to ask maybe about a couple of examples that people can do around the moon cycle that would help them with their own wellness and acknowledging that passage in time.
The moon is such a powerful influence on our mind, on our emotions, on cooling our body, right? Like there are many different, these are all Vedic traditions as well that also are shared in yoga tradition too, right? And one of the things about the moon as well, in terms of women's reproductive health, is women's reproductive health is tied to the moon cycle, right? So, like when you have a month or a 4 cycle of the moon, often women will like mimic or sync their periods or their sort of cyclical nature to the cycle of the moon in 28 days, 32 days, right? So this is a very ancient tradition that is practiced by many different cultures. And I think that as we moved into modernization, the modernization of medicine, the modernization of equality between men and women, we've lost this tradition. It's a sacred tradition, right? So I think it's really important for everyone actually to notice the moon cycle, because you will feel different actually. If you actually just take 1 month and you go through that cycle and you notice how your own cyclical self is changing according to that, you might notice some like energetic spurts, some sort of like, let's hang out and be gentle, then let's go back in and become like inward, because that is a cycle of the moon too, right? The moon, its 4 cycles also have that kind of energy. So I think that this also can help with artistic practice, because maybe there are certain times in a moon cycle that you feel more creative, you feel called to build something out, or there's times where you need to go inward and have some alone time to imagine what you want to create, and there's times just you need to rest and not do anything, and with that rest will erupt something later. But as a society, we don't give ourselves enough time to rest. We are perpetually tired.
I mean, it's funny because, there's a lot of superstition around the moon too, right? Even, the full moon, people say animals and everyone, they're acting more crazy. Traffic is worse. Something is, going on. There's kind of like an odd superstitious acknowledgement that yes, somehow it affects us, but you don't really kind of intentionally tie it to that until you start thinking about it. Like, around this phase last month, this all kind of seemed to go a little bit crazy too. Maybe that has something to do with your biorhythm as well.
And that's so true, because actually, when we look at the moon cycle as well, the ocean tides go in mimic the moon cycle, right? Like this is something that is scientifically proven. Or 80% of our body is water, I believe. So if the water of the ocean is being so heavily influenced by the nature of the moon, how do we as humans not understand or acknowledge or understand that connection to the moon as well?
I still put a glass of water on my windowsill during a full moon, and then I drink it and I feel great. So yeah, we're going to take a really quick second pause here to reflect a little bit about what we've discussed in terms of rituals for connection and rituals for wellness. Give the whiteboard back and you can add to it if you so choose. And we will convene back in 3 minutes to talk about rituals for creativity. away, and we'll come back to talk about creative practices with ritual. I don't know about you, Soni, but sometimes when I sit down to write, I feel an incredible amount of anxiety and pressure, and it just doesn't happen. It just doesn't work very well. And so I know that implementing some very kind of meaningful, simple rituals around a writing practice has done me a world of good. Because one thing that ritual does for you is that it helps you sort of recognize that there is a time, a place, space, you know what to do when you're kind of in the world of ritual. So it can be actually very soothing. And
No, I totally agree with you, Fawnda. The thing is that I'm a classical Indian dancer, right? And one of the first things that you do before you start your practice is you actually do like a prayer. Every single Indian classical dance form has this. And basically, it's like recognizing your gurus or your ancestors who have brought this dance to you, recognizing the earth that you're dancing on, and recognizing your parents and your community and your family, because they're blessing you to do this sacred art, right? There's this whole like you do this and you like do like it's very intricate and it's very intentional the way you do this particular prayer, right? So once you do this prayer, you know you're ready to dance. And it could be a practice, it could be a performance, it could be something that you're creating as a choreography. But it's just like stepping into that space and creating that space, knowing that it's there for you, right?
yeah, that's wonderful. And I think that that leads us really well into how we can use ritual and how we can make new rituals to help enhance your creativity or even help motivate when you're having a little bit of a hard time getting through, say, a creative block or anything. On the dance front, I know that as a Ukrainian dancer, we used to start every big performance or concert with a presentation of bread and salt. And bread and salt are very symbolic in a lot of cultures, but in many East European cultures, it signifies that, that you will never go hungry and that your life will have flavor. And salt is also sacred in a lot of other ways. It's very purifying. It's meant to bless things. So yeah, there's all sorts of things like that that kind of add meaning and add intention to even just the start of a show or a practice. So there's a lot of fairly well-known creative rituals. I'm kind of a sucker for the ones for writers, so I've listed a couple here. The Daily Rituals of Writers, which was posted on the Marginalian, Maria Popova's blog, is a really good example of seeing just sort of like a lot of different rituals and techniques, time of day, things like that can work for creativity. Morning pages is Julia Cameron's probably best known strategy for every morning you wake up and you write 3 pages. It doesn't matter what it is, just brain dump basically, because it helps clear the way for the rest of your day and your intention to let other things kind of bubble up that are maybe less kind of distracting than what ends up happening on those pages. Another one that I really liked was Twyla Tharp's The Creative Habit. She calls it a habit, but it's actually a ritual, I think, when she says that her actual dance practice every day doesn't really begin when she gets to the studio. It begins when she gets in the cab to go to the studio. And it's that ride and that time to sort of think and absorb so that when she arrives at the studio, she's ready to begin. And so that ritual, I think, was something that I thought was very cool because Twyla Tharp, I mean, she's pretty cool too. We've talked about these kinds of things actually a lot already. There's a lot you can do to build a creative ritual. And we have a worksheet that we'll include a link to at the end of the presentation that will help you sort of create one of these rituals or establish something yourself. We've talked a little bit about establishing a space and or time that's reserved for creative work. So it's building intention. You could say sacredness, but it's building intention and meaning around where and when you do it. You can build cues or anchors that help signal you to start and finish, and that also can help wind you back from distraction if something happens. I know a coach who used to use a meditation bell to just kind of like whenever she got a little bit taken away from her work for some reason or another, she would sit down, she would ring the bell again, and then become ready to kind of immerse yourself back in the practice. So whatever you do really just has to have meaning and intention behind it. I like to try and keep my creative work separate from other work. just so that there still is that kind of like intention behind it, that it is special in a way. And that, yeah, you can also adapt and work with something until you know what really works for you. Sometimes things don't work, not the same thing will work for everyone. So do what works for you. Once you find that, find ways to make it more intentional, keep the signal going. And
yeah, I definitely think that in terms of also knowing your creative practice, right? Like yourself, knowing yourself. So rituals can change. They're not set in stone. They're not like forever, right?
say yes, the idea that a ritual is rigid, as we kind of went through the 3 R's at the beginning, doesn't have to mean that it's completely rigid forever in time. However, what will help you stick to it when you are trying to build more creativity in your life or ensure that you're really focusing on your own self-care and wellness is to kind of get that idea of rigidity, but also that the rigidity allows your mind psychologically to feel safer because it's reliable. And so I think that that's probably what we want to emphasize about when you do have a ritual and you want to adapt it. How do you still kind of make it something that you know your psyche can rely on and it is safe for you to do?
Yes, beautiful. And just talking about ritual, what is so beautiful that happened right now? My doorbell rang because my neighbor brought me a Christmas tree. So every year I feel like, just that's another ritual, right? Like during certain times, like whether it's Diwali or Christmas, people give things or they express gratitude or they show love or they show care, right? So I really appreciate that we're able to, as humanity, as community, still practice in these traditions that also inspire creativity, motivation, and give reason to create beautiful art, beautiful culture. Because I think collectively, we forget sometimes how to just appreciate and have gratitude for the rituals that we can create in our lives.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing that that just happened because gifts are a huge part of ritual, and gifts can also be very symbolic, and they're imbued with meaning sometimes. My mother, actually, to go back to bread and salt, every time someone has a housewarming, she gives them bread, salt, and wine, and that is to bless the house. And yeah, so these gestures that we can make, it doesn't have to be a ritual, doesn't have to be an event. It can also just be something that has that intention behind it. So that's really awesome. I kind of love that we got to include that. So I think that that's sort of us wrapping up here. Thank you again, Soni, and to Mass Culture for hosting this session. There's a link to a worksheet on here, and I linked to an interview with Zigalatas on his book. And yeah, you can connect with us. Soni, do we have anything that we have to do before we wrap this up?
No, again, I'd like to thank everyone that's able to make this asynchronous workshop. And we hope that you are able to use this virtual worksheet and incorporate some of the things that we've shared, or maybe you already incorporate them, which is great. So keep it going. I mean, this year, Fawnda and I will be launching a podcast that actually will cover some of these things more in depth and have a little bit of different flavor around sort of the ongoing interests and connections and thoughts that we have on arts, culture, and heritage, particularly in Alberta, but across Canada as well. So we'd love to have you join us. So please, you can connect with us either via my website or Fawnda's email, and check us out on our socials, which will be posted as well. So that is it for now. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks everyone. Bye.